everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan, and I'm the host of the Spiritual Inspire show. And today I have an amazing guest, Carl Calleman. So Dr. Calleman is a scientist with a PhD in physical biology from the University of Stockholm, a former senior researcher of environmental health at the University of Washington in Seattle, an expert on chemical carcinogens for the World Health Organization. He's the author of 7 books on Maya, including The 9 Waves of Creation, and his latest, The Quantum Science of Psychedelics, in which, among other things, he explains why altered states of consciousness exist and how they work. In order to understand the effect of psychedelics, Dr. Calleman went through a number of plant medicine ceremonies himself, and those ceremonies changed his life. Dr. Calleman, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Claudiu, for having me. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
I read your latest book, Quantum Science of Psychedelics, and I was quite impressed. So for my viewers, please give us a quick summary overview of what your intentions were with this book.
Yeah, okay. So I think the starting point was really the whole concept of a multi-dimensional reality. That is a sort of a cosmology that a lot of shamanic or indigenous cultures would take for granted, more or less. In other words, that things may occur in what we would call different dimensions. And that would include then that in this reality, we may be influenced by spirits, and I think that's an important aspect of it. But sometimes that you even jump between dimensions. And that sort of, to me, seemed to be a little bit consistent with how in quantum theory, if you look at the more microcosmic quantum theory on the subatomic level, you can see that electrons jump between their orbitals. And so what exists in one orbital may not exist from the perspective of another. So that was a, you know, what I was saying here was then that quantum theory as such is much more consistent with the ancient or indigenous view of a multi-dimensional reality. Now, then the question becomes, okay, I may believe so, and I may believe so especially because I've had experiences with certain psychedelics. But then the question is, how do you prove it scientifically? And what I then turn to is my accumulated knowledge and experience with the Mayan cosmology. And there we have another, you might say, ancient people that entertained a view of the world as being multi-dimensional. And so, but the good thing about the Maya is that what we refer to as their calendar system, which really what I think was their attempt of understanding the evolution of the universe. But that calendar system, it actually has dates for shift points in the calendar. And as soon as you have dates, you have numbers. And then when you have numbers, you have something that really comes much closer to the scientific ideals of the modern world. Because if you can match up the kind of shift points that the Maya would describe with what we now, from a modern point of knowledge, know about the evolution of the universe, then you can talk about science. You have a structure of thinking that can be true or false, and I would say it's true, of course, and nobody has been able to prove that it's false, But the good thing about the numbers is that it brings that kind of objective scrutiny as a possibility. And so that's what I came to look at, the Mayan cosmology, and especially the kind of terrace-formed pyramids that they would build as another form of quantum evolution, of quantum theory. And so this is how I came to write this book, really, to make some kind of sense of these different sources.
And this type of approach, in fact, will make Maya and your books much more easy to understand for people who don't believe in something which is not tangible, but they believe in numbers and science, correct?
Exactly, yes.
You also mentioned about the, the sixth wave of creation, which started in 3115 BC. And the quality of people accessing the spirit world at that time was pretty much a default quality. So they were spiritually rich and technologically deprived. Today, in my opinion, is the other way around. We are technologically rich and spiritually deprived. Absolutely. Was there a balance in between these times where we are both in balance?
Oh, okay. Well, so you already introduced here an aspect of my book, which is about the waves, the sixth wave you mentioned. And the sixth wave then should be looked upon as one particular level, the sixth level of a 9-storied pyramid. And so you might say that these ancient peoples, they would look upon the evolution of the cosmos as sort of climbing through 9 different quantum leaps, coming up to the top and going through different periods where the human mind would be different because of different resonances with the cosmic source. And so it goes in terms of waves. And when it comes to this, what you mentioned, the sixth wave activated in 3115 BC, then that particular wave, you might say, created a very structured mind, a mind that was capable of creating pyramids and cities and writing and all these things we think of as civilization. But before that, there were very few, we see very few manifestations of people having a strictly, rigorously structured mind. So, but then, to return to your question then, was there a time when there was more of a balance? Well, these waves, they are like serpentine waves, and then there will be peaks when there is sort of a strengthening of the new structure of the mind coming in. And then they will be alternating with valleys, when you might say history rests, or there could even be destruction of a civilization, or you don't see the forward movement of civilization in those time periods of valleys. But on the other hand, with every peak in such a wave, you will see a more marked development of those qualities we call civilized. But at the same time, you might say, this happens at the expense of the earlier state of consciousness that was much more floating, much more open, I would say, but much less structured. And so you might say that, I would say that if there ever was some kind of a balance, if there could be a balance between two so widely different things, but that balance would have probably happened around the midpoint up until now of this sixth wave. and that would have been around 500 BC. That would be the midpoint, and that is a time that in human history is considered as carrying remarkable changes. You might say structure is really taking over at this point. And what I'm referring to more specifically is then that it's at that particular time, 2,500 years ago, that in Greece, especially, they started to really work with science, work with philosophy in a very rigorous way and so forth. And all of the world, new religions with more structured content would appear. Whether you're talking about in China, Confucianism and Taoism, which is from that period of time, or if you talk about the ancient Maya, then we have the oldest examples of their calendar being inscribed in stones also from that point in time, which by itself is a very structured concept, the calendars of the Maya. And so, yes, I would say that would be somewhat of a turning point when structure, civilization really comes to dominate of the earlier, more floating, more beliefs in gods everywhere, beliefs in everything being enchanted, everything being spiritual, and so forth. There is a certain point in this wave-like evolution where a shift takes place.
So then can we consider that these quantum downloads, if I can call them that,
yeah,
happen at every single peak in the evolution, or they happen in between as well?
Yeah, I would say the downloads happen in the peaks. And that's the main time, so to speak. And that the periods in between the peaks are more there to prepare for the next step forward, so to speak. Overall, I would say that's the case.
In the book, you also mention you talk about the Yugas, which are pretty much 20,000 periods of 20,000 years. But other people talk about 24,000 years. Is this 2,000 year delta discrepancy influence somehow the history and the waves, or it's insignificant if you look at the overall picture?
Well, I think originally the yoga system was more of a quantum system than it turned out to be. So originally, I think it's quite clear that the idea that the Kali Yuga would be initiated 3102 BCE. And that is pretty much exactly at the same time as the Mayan long count, or the sixth wave of the Maya. And if you look at the original descriptions of the beginning of the Kali Yuga, what happened, so to speak, there is the description that which says that there was a demon, Kali, who descended to the earth and created conflicts, quarrels, and so forth. And it's also said that Krishna, who had been sort of a light deity, he actually left the world at that point in time. And there is I can't remember which particular temple that there is in India, where they say that he left the earth. And these kind of changes that originally were attributed to the Kali Yuga, they are much more in line with a quantum shift. In other words, something just happened seemingly for no reason, but you know, if we then put it in parallel to the Mayan sixth wave, I would say that the Kali Yuga really is the sixth wave. But then, much more recently have come these a modern version, in particular then the one developed by Sri Yukteswar, who claims that it's a precessional cycle. And first of all, I don't believe that the precessional cycle has any meaning. But more importantly, that is not the original Kali Yoga view. That is a view that has been very much influenced by later mathematics and so forth. And it's very much a Newtonian concept. And you know, Isaac Newton was actually the person himself who developed the differential equation that describes the precession of the equinoxes. And that's a pure, as I see it, it's a purely physical phenomenon where based on the masses of objects and how those will revolve around the earth, and so to speak. And I simply believe more in the quantum model, which is the more recent version of understanding the universe, or the matter of the universe, than of that, and then of that particular idea that the Kali Yuga would be linked to the precession of the equinoxes. I don't think you find that in any ancient Indian Hindu text.
Thank you. I found very interesting the concept of the 8 partitioning of the geometric mind, and how it was downloaded, again, I think around the 6th wave. And while reading your book, and I found the reference to Göbekli Tepe, and based on previous information, I knew that they built that site about 7,000, maybe 10,000 years BC. And that came a little bit in contradiction with the download of the geometric mind, which was 3115 BC. Can you please explain that concept for those which will have the same question, like why the discrepancy, why the difference between Göbekli Tepe, which also has a geometric artifacts, and the one which came much later on overall all over the earth?
Yeah, well, I believe it has something to do with something the Maya would look upon as earlier creations. That's how I would call it pre-waves. And if you look at, and they are, you know, so it's true that even if there are no real civilizations before 5,100, there are megalithic structures. And one of the most interesting ones is the one in Göbekli Tepe in current day Turkey. And which was built, as it seemed, right before maybe people started to practice agriculture. What they do know is that this must have been built by hunter-gatherers, and this is not just conjecture, because they have actually studied the stomach content of some of the people that they have found there. And so what I'm saying here is that before the real download of the geometric structure, there was 5,100 years before that point in time, there was a, what should I say, an earlier, a much weaker form of this that sort of served for about 5,100 years then to prepare the ground for the real civilizations. So as you're saying, in Göbekli Tepe, there are some of the world's very first perpendicular structures are found. And that, as I interpreted, means that people then started to download this geometry, and then because this geometry seemed to come from the cosmic source, they felt compelled then to build some kind of a megalithic structure in honor of this new quantum state, of this new geometry that they started to download. And so you can see then, after that, it's only after that point in time that people started to practice agriculture. But agriculture, as I look upon it, is really it's the reason people start with agriculture is that their minds start to download minds that have boundaries. And because in order to practice agriculture, you have to set off fields with boundaries, so to speak, that separates the crop that you want to have, and you have to set off your animals through boundaries. You will keep them maybe in either you're herding them with a boundary of a dog, or you would have even a house where you can put them, which is a boundary, so to speak. So before that point in time, before 10,200 about, when Göbekli Tepe, people didn't have any kind of geometry of their mind. So they couldn't, but they, when that first came and they downloaded it, they said, wow, the gods want us to do something else here. And the first thing that they did was to build these amazing temples. But then after that point in time, you can see slowly spreading across the world agriculture, because it really comes out of the same fact that what they were downloading was a geometry of boundaries, and those boundaries they honored with a temple. And then it took another 5,100 years of agriculture before the really strong effect came from the sixth wave that made people build pyramids that are remarkably precise, maybe so precise we couldn't even replicate it today. But it is, I think what happened then was that the geometry that they downloaded came first in a very pure form, so to speak. There wasn't that confusion of various serpentine influences. It was very pure, and if you have a very pure geometry downloaded to your brain, you will build cities or pyramids that are very sharp, very perpendicular, etc., etc.
Interesting. So can we associate the same process with the creation of the Upanishads, which also are very old, 7,000 to 10,000 years old?
That could well be. That's a trickier things, because they were orally transmitted for a long time, and so nobody knows exactly how old they are, but apparently they are old. That's all we can say.
Yeah. In previous interviews, you touch on our dualistic way of seeing the world around us, of course. What do you think is the solution to change that?
Well, yes. So this sixth wave, the sixth level of the pyramid that, it is the purpose of humanity to climb, I would say, that meant that from the cosmic source, and in this regard, I would say that the Maya give a fairly precise description of what they thought happened. They talked about as the center of the tree of life. The Maya today would call it the heart of the heavens. But they talked about that, and it had some other names. It would be called the place of creation, or it could be also called the raised up sky place. And especially that latter name, the raised up sky place, is an interesting thing, because it sounds like that the way they looked upon it is that a raised up sky, a sky was raised in the center of the universe. And it sounds like that was some kind of a slide in some kind of a slideshow. A new slide was put up in the center of the universe, and then they would project that all across the universe, and people who were in resonance with the waves that transmitted this slide, they would start to absorb, to take in, to have their minds organized by that particular slide, showing some new geometry. And a somewhat similar view seems to have been among the Sumerians, who had this divinity, the god of the sky, you might say, called Anu, which was an 8-partitioned structure, like a star in 8 partitions. So we have exactly the same 8-partitioning slide in both of those traditions, independently describing the source of this in the same way, essentially. And so once that slide of a certain geometry, and we can understand why people talk about sacred geometry, because if this geometry comes from the center of the universe or the creative source of the universe, then you can indeed talk about that as a form of sacred geometry. But anyway, what happened with people then when they started to create resonance with this particular slide was that their brains downloaded a set of boundaries that would that they would later project onto their world. And so if you have a 8-partitioned structure, taking down that, it means that you build an 8-sided pyramid, for instance, because the big pyramid in Giza is actually 8-sided. And it's hard to see any other reasons why they would build an 8-sided pyramid, because it's very difficult to build one. They must have felt that this was divinely inspired. So this geometry, this perpendicular, this vertical, horizontal geometry, it created all kinds of aspects of reality that we think of as civilization. Another one you might say is that at that particular point, people started writing. And so why would they start to write? Well, if they downloaded a mental structure with boundaries that were horizontal and vertical, it means that if they had signs or symbols that would symbolize something. Now, if you just have one symbol, you know, I could make a drawing of an apple, and then everybody would understand apple. But that doesn't make writing, so to speak. If I'm saying I ate an apple, then I have to write something. There's several different components to that. And that means that you have to use a set of different symbols. And these symbols has to be organized in such a way that there is an unambiguous interpretation of it. And so if you have a line, you know, all writing goes either in vertical or in horizontal lines from right to left or the other way around. But you do need these lines in order to organize this. So that's why I'm saying that writing came out of downloading a geometry that was perpendicular and 8-partitioned. So I could go on a long time and talk about how different aspects of civilizations were created by this downloading. But another aspect is the conflicts. You know, if we just assume that the Kali Yuga is the same as the sixth wave, that it came out of the downloading of the same lines, you might say. Well, then they, in the Indian tradition, they pick up on the fact and realize that, well, these lines also create duality. It also creates a quarrel and conflict, as this demon supposedly would bring. And what we also know from the history of many other parts of the world, whether it's from Egypt or Sumer, the societies became very stratified. Some became the adored kings or pharaohs, and others became slaves. And so there is a yin-yang polarity inherent in this particular geometry that people started to download at that time. And there is a good side to that geometry, or that duality. It created the basis for discernment and all kinds of technological advances and so forth. But it also very much created, broke up the previous oneness that people presumably had been living in, and created inequality and brutality and warfare and cruelty. And especially so, you know, since people felt that after all they were downloading something from the cosmic source. And patriarchal societies, many societies in those days were slave societies, and there was a huge difference between those that were supposedly in the light, who were the rulers or the pharaohs and so forth, and those that were in the dark, who then were slaves or so. So a society, human civilization as we have known it for most of the 5,000 years into the past, has been exactly a slave society, a society of great inequality and so forth.
Yeah, it's a very interesting subject. So now let's turn towards the main subject of the book, which is the psychedelics.
Yeah.
So based on your own research and corroborated with others, you reached the conclusion that the psychedelics do unify the brain by disengaging the eight partitioning of the geometric mind. Can you please elaborate?
Well, yeah, so we have some background now. You know, there's been the theory out there previously, I think notably from Terence McKenna, that his idea was that there was a stone ape, and when this ape started to eat mushrooms and get psychedelic experiences, it would start to create civilization. My idea is opposite to that. I think people were at a default state in a sort of unstructured, floating state until the downloading of this strict, rigorous geometry that compartmentalized the human brain and created all these kind of distinctions that we know of. So with the experiences I have from psychedelics, you know, nothing has made me think that I would become a more better creator of civilization from doing that. It's the other way around. It's opening myself up to a world that doesn't limit my perceptions. You know, there's been the thought, and I adhere to it. I think it comes from Aldous Huxley originally, that the brain is, or the mind, either one, is like a reducing valve, as it's been said, something that normally limits our perception of reality. And that I adhere to that theory. But I also add then to that the sixth wave, with its structure, geometry, and compartmentalization of the human brain, it creates exactly such a reducing valve that limits our perspective, that makes us one-dimensional in a sense, makes us unable to resonate or perceive all the other phenomena that belong to other quantum states or states of consciousness, as you might say. So if that is the truth, if that is the case, then you would expect what psychedelics do, it's actually to disentangle or to disengage this structured mind by through their interactions with the human brain, and that would explain a number of different phenomena. I mean, this, in general terms, there is a lot of people that have had the same kind of idea, that what psychedelics do is that they disengage, or they open ourselves up to a cosmic mind, so to speak. There's nothing new in what I'm saying there. But what is new with what I'm saying is that I provide the scientific background to this by saying, well, here we have the sixth wave. We can see how it compartmentalizes the human brain and the human experience. Well, then that fits with that theory of the mind as being a reducing valve. And so it seems then that, you know, the way I look upon the human mind is, I think that's become clear already, is that it's like a geometry that we download. And if that our brains download, and the mind then, that geometry is particularly anchored in the pineal gland. And so if a substance, a chemical substance, is able to disengage that mind and change the relationship between mind and brain in such a way that an individual becomes open to resonating with all the different waves, including those that were creating a floating reality or spiritual reality with strange beings and so forth, that we can read about in ancient sources and we still find in many indigenous sources today. Well, then you would have an explanation actually to how psychedelics work, and it's, you know, part of this, part of the argument here is really also to see how the time-wise introduction of psychedelics have happened in the modern world, you might say. That it's actually something that follows these waves that which have fostered that desire to sort of break out of the confines of the lower quantum states that have limited the human perception. And so in that synchronicity of those, the first and the second wave of psychedelics, as we talk about, in the synchronicities of those two so-called waves with the Mayan waves of creation, indicate that the two are very directly related. And so, yes, again, we come back to this possibility that I advocate, that it really is a matter of disengaging a reducing valve, but that reducing valve is one of the states of consciousness on the cosmic pyramid that the Maya would describe.
Yes. So you also believe in the healing aspect of psychedelics, and at this point, only psilocybin is being run in tests, you know, in a controlled environment in various labs. But if anything else, like something like ayahuasca, San Pedro, iboga, will get legalized, they require a specific ceremony. People in the jungle do that, the shamans do that. When they call the spirits, they open the circle. And this might become a problem if these plants will become legalized. How do you think that these ceremonies can be controlled and the sacred aspect can be kept in place?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because what you're alluding to now is that over the past 15 years or so, fairly large number of studies have been performed, mostly with psilocybin, which comes from the mushrooms, but a couple of others, psychedelic substances as well. And overall, the results have been surprisingly positive, you might say. In certain, you might say, adverse medical conditions, say addiction, depression, compulsion, obsession, and so forth. So there is a very good results in terms of the effects of psychedelics on those particular conditions. Surprisingly so, I must say, but it's just the fact, and these studies come from quite reputable medical institutions in the modern world. But one of the things that they find is also the following. They find that the more of a spiritual experience that the people have who are going in for this kind of a treatment, the better the result. So, and that's consistent, and regardless of what kind of substance they're dealing with, or plant or so forth, and regardless also of what kind of an adverse effect that they want to treat. They find, and they made these kind of questionnaires, of course, where they sort of evaluate what is the spiritual component of this experience and so forth. And they come to that conclusion that I already said. If there is a strong component, if people really feel they are having some meeting with a cosmic source, with God, or whatever is sacred, they might say, then the healing effect is much stronger, because it means people come in contact with a much, normally with our reducing valves, we are limited like this, and we think I'm just the only one here, I'm a separate individual, and so forth. But if you then disengage this reducing valve and you come out in the cosmos and experience part of the origin, the divine origin of this, then that can be very healing. And so I think that well, to begin with, so there is sort of a little bit of a difference then between people that are going to the Amazonas or some other place where they will meet a shaman whose job it is really to keep the people focused, you might say, or not, that may not be the word, but to create some kind of a sacred space for the ceremony. And on the other hand, you might say, then there are now the studies that are going on in medical established places like that. But I think the medical people that are working with this now in the US especially, and England also, and so forth, I think they're aware of the problem. And I think they recognize that very strongly. You can't just take this as a pill, so to speak. I take a pill and then I'll be fine. That's not how it works. It is not really the pill that does the job. And in fact, one of the things I'm saying in my book is that the effect is not really pharmacological. and that may ring very strange to some of my biochemical colleagues, but it really is not. The essence of the effect is not pharmacological. It's an effect that has to do with the change in the relationship between the mind and the brain, and opening the individual up to the cosmic divine source, and however that is being perceived or communicated with, and so forth. And so, you know, I can only say that as far as I hear, the people that are now exploring these the effects, and there is a sort of a stage 3 clinical trial on the way in the US when it comes to depression treatment. These people, they are fully aware of this, and they will do what they can in order to create a sacred space. And I also would say here that, you know, the more that those people that are doing such tests, the more they would come study my theory, which really is an explanation to why there is an effect of the cosmic context, so to speak, the better the chances will be. You know, they have all been trained, like I was originally as a scientist as well, to think that, you know, the human brain and mind, we're sort of isolated from the cosmic context and so forth. And that's a dying paradigm. And I think this book actually provides a solid evidence that we have to go, if we want to understand ourselves, our relationship to the cosmos, our future, and so forth, we have to broaden our understanding of ourselves, and see that we are actually gaining information from the cosmic center through cosmic waves, and that's what might help those continued trials that are going on into the effects of psychedelics.
So true, and in my opinion, taking plant medicine is another way of showing respect and to the indigenous people and the shamanic culture, and you know, paying attention how they treat the plant medicine, because to them it's very sacred. So we should, you know, follow that process and listen to them.
Yes.
Be less egotistic, and you know,
Yeah.
Follow their example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you think there is more knowledge to learn from Maya? Is that a distinguished subject, or you're going to keep digging in onto it?
Well, I think I know what I need to know for now, so to speak. It's many of the sources from the Maya are quite fragmentary to begin with, and sometimes very hard to interpret. For instance, there are only 4 remaining books from ancient times, and those have a lot of gods and monsters portrayed that, you know, it's hard for us to know exactly what they meant by. I think, however, that the very way that they built their pyramids, which may seem like a very simplistic way of linking things, but if you get it in its fullness, it has a tremendous amount of information. It really is a model of the cosmic evolution scheme, you might say. That's what a pyramid, a Mayan pyramid, is. And for now, I think there is enough to get what we really need to know about our current situation and our past, and we're coming from, and so forth.
Thank you. In one section of your book, you talk about something very sensitive, and I really enjoyed reading that chapter about the interaction between Yahweh, which is the God from the Bible, and the serpent, which is part of the creation. So your explanation, rang true with me. Can you expand on it a little bit, please?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So first then I should say then that in ancient times, people almost all over the world had serpents as creator gods. In China, to this day, they honor the dragons, the serpentine dragons. But the Maya and the people of Mexico, they built their main pyramids in honor to something they call the plumed serpent. And then in Australia, the Aborigines, they talk about the rainbow serpent as the main creator god. And so this seems to have been a creator god. The oldest piece of art that's been found on our planet is actually a serpent that has been found in a cave in Botswana, in Africa. That's about 70,000 years old. So the ancient peoples, they really thought of the serpents as being significant creator gods. And the way I look upon that is that the reason they had those was that there were waves, that the serpents, they were actually symbols of sine waves. And if you're living in a natural setting somehow, you can't find any other symbol of a sine wave than a serpent. So this seems to have been a ubiquitous symbol of creation in ancient times. And one of those that most people probably have heard of is from the book of Genesis, in the first book of the Bible, and the standoff, if you like, between the god Yahweh and on one side, and on the other side the human beings, Adam and Eve, and the serpent. And what makes that particular story stand out is that, unlike most other ancient traditions, in this case, the god cursed the serpent. In Mexico, people built pyramids in honor of the serpents. In this case, it is like the ego rejecting the flow of creation or something like that. That's how I would look upon it, that they had created a god that was really a projection of their own egos, to some extent anyway. And then, of course, that became the beginning of the Jewish religion, and then that whole idea was also taken up by Christianity, and then that is the religion that has for maybe 2,000 years dominated the Western civilization. And so that's what we have come to know. And in that, Christians, some Christians at least, still look upon the serpent as the devil. And so I don't share that view. And I think that if you study how evolution has continued from that point, which is about 2,500 years ago, you will find that regardless of God's purported cursing of the serpent, evolution proceeds according to a serpentine model. It goes up and down, and that's really what a lot of ancient peoples would believe. The Hindus would say that Shiva was the god of creation and destruction, and he destroyed in order to create the space for some new creation. That's how things evolved in at least in their view, but it seems to have been the case with many other peoples as well. So it's important to know, whatever people want to make of it, they should know that this cursing of the serpent is a very unique aspect of the Judeo-Christian, later Western religion that's come there. And I should add here also that the number one most common experience that people are having when they are taking ayahuasca is the serpent. serpents, they see many different serpents creating geometric patterns and so forth. And I think that's sort of just reality, wanting nature, reality, creation, wanting to come back and make an imprint of people and make them think twice and learn about how the world is evolving.
Yes, and also this curse comes in contradiction to what God is, or supposed to be, a loving entity. So yes, it's something which we all have to look again and again and have our own understanding of that concept, the meaning of that chapter of in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we're towards the end of the interview. I want to ask you one more question about the quantum entanglement, or the quantum concept from quantum physics. So do you think that quantum entanglement applies to anything in nature? Because I wrote a book called Water Entanglement, in which water became alive and changed in one part of the world, and right away the same properties showed in a different river on the other side of the world. Mm-hmm. So I want to know, it was a speculative fiction book, but I want to know from your perspective if that's possible and applies to anything else in nature.
Yeah, well, it's a great question to ask. And to begin with, when you talk about quantum theory in the scientific sense, most scientists would only refer to what happens on a microcosmic subatomic level. And so what I've done here in this book is to, based on the ideas that were prevalent in ancient times, I developed a macrocosmic quantum theory. And that would, as I see it, there is sort of a connection then from the quantum states of the cosmic center that are being mediated through the galaxy, the solar system, through the planet to ourselves. So in that sense, I'm suggesting then that there is an entanglement between the cosmic center and ourselves. And it doesn't seem we can do much about it. It's just we may relate a little bit differently to the quantum states, but there is, that is such a thing. And I also think there are, if you look at different galaxies on a very large scale, then I think they are entangled with the cosmic axis that I talk about early in the book, which is a fairly recently scientifically sound finding of an axis that goes through the entire cosmos. And the indications now are that the axis of galaxies are entangled with that particular cosmic axis. And how much or so, I don't know. So my own view would be that certain things are entangled all over the cosmos. We are entangled with a cosmic axis and so forth. But I wouldn't think that everything is entangled with everything else. That would, if that would happen, then if I did this, you would also move your arm, and you didn't do that. And so I wouldn't think so, but I'm certainly think it's reasonable to assume that on all levels there is entanglement of quantum phenomena, but it's not everything is entangled with everything else. Certain things are entangled.
Thank you. Fascinating. Are you working on another book?
No, I'm not. What happens with me is that sometimes a book sort of comes to me and tells me that I'm supposed to write it, and usually that happens when I'm probably ready to have enough material to write such a book. And then I start writing, and that could take, in this case, I think it took a year and a half to write. And then in that writing, I'm pretty much hibernating, I'm an introvert, and now I think it's time for me to be somewhat of an extrovert and try to get out with what my findings are, and then we'll see if in the future there comes another book telling me that it's time for me to write it, but it hasn't happened yet.
Dr. Calleman, thank you very much for accepting the invitation once again, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you about, again, the quantum science of psychedelics. For those watching this interview, please share, subscribe, check my Patreon account at patreon.com/Claudiu Murgan. And until next time, love and gratitude. Thank you, Dr. Calleman.
Thank you so much, Claudiu. Thank you.